Welcome to today's webinar entitled Strengthening Communication Skills on and Off Court. This webinar is part of the ITA and USTA Learning Series and powered by eSkills Media and Production Services. And now, folks, I'm very pleased to turn things over to our presenters, Rebecca Wozni and Courtney Potke, to get us started with today's feature presentation. Rebecca, over to you.
Thanks so much, Matt. Very happy to be here today and to present our final edition of the very first annual learning series as a joint education project between the ITA and the USTA. Today's webinar is Strengthening Communication Skills on and Off Court. We're going to venture down communication and emotional intelligence from just a general knowledge perspective. We'll be incorporating tennis-specific and officiating-specific type of information throughout the presentation, and we'll be also answering questions, as Matt said, throughout the presentation as well as the end. So if we have not had a chance to meet you, my name is Rebecca Wozni, and I am pleased to be presenting with Courtney Potke from the ITA. She's been with the ITA since 2016, and she has been an official since 2005. So a lot of officiating experience on the court. And as you can see, she's been recognized with the McGovern Award in 2012. So we're very happy to have her expertise with us today. And I'm very pleased to say I have gotten to meet both Darren and her twin daughters and 5-year-old son, and got to meet with them around Atlanta, Georgia, just a few weeks ago. If you have not had a chance to meet me, I look forward to meeting with you over the course of the coming year. I live in Orlando, Florida. I have been doing adult education and training experiences, both online and in person, with nonprofits and education settings specifically for over 15 years. I enjoy a lot of activities. I do not have a tennis background, but I do love sports and feel that they make a deep impact into the individual lives of both the athletes, the spectators who attend in real time, or who might be watching games. I enjoy watching SEC football myself. So now let's take a little bit of a dive into communication and talk a little bit about what communication is. Communication is, in essence, the exchange of information. As you can probably imagine, there are symbols, signs, and behaviors, all which communicate. I like to remind people, if you have a pet or you know people who have pets, those pets have specific signs that they give when they want something, and they learn through an exchange of behavior how to request from the humans in the house what it is they might want. I can think specifically of dog owners who learn the signs and behaviors of their dog when their dog needs to go outside and use the restroom. I've had a cat in the past, so we don't necessarily have those forms of behaviors, but certainly my cat had very specific behaviors she would do when she wanted to snuggle, or when she wanted some attention from either myself or my husband. And it was an exchange of behavior that communicated over time from the humans to the animal. Hey, this, when you do this behavior, this is how we will respond. And in turn, the animals learned, oh, when I do certain behaviors, or I want a certain response, I can do certain behaviors and I will get what I want from the human. So communication is certainly more than the words that we say or write. Either physically write with our hands, or write through social media. Personal rapport is also a big part of communication. We will talk a little bit about that later in our emotional intelligence segment. So we have 7 major factors that influence communication. Language. When we think of communication, I think of the words we say. Language is probably the most important factor of that. If I am speaking English and I'm trying to talk with somebody who only speaks French, we are not going to be able to communicate with words. Culture is another very big part of communication. If I were in a room with you all, I might sit and ask everybody to go around the room and maybe share what part of the country you are from. And we would find that we have a lot of different cultures just in the United States. And in those different parts, we have different cultures and different traditions, different ways of communicating and explaining things and interrelating with each other. Being from Florida originally, and Courtney from Atlanta, we certainly can attest to the Southern culture and how being in the South at certain times of the year or certain occasions, or when you interact with family or friends in certain ways, that has a certain meaning. I moved to Philadelphia about almost 10 years ago now, and the behaviors that I would participate in my Florida home and work and friend groups didn't translate the same way in Philadelphia. That culture, the culture of people living in the Northeast, is a little different, and so I had to take some time and adapt and learn. Okay, if I want to interact with people in the Northeast America, what does that look like? What do I do? What's the way to greet somebody warmly? Particularly in the Philadelphia area, that's a very different than how a greeting is considered warm coming from people in Alabama, which is where my husband is from, or in Florida. After living in Philadelphia for 2 years, we moved to Chicago. And in the course of a couple weeks, I had experienced a completely different culture there, right there, still in my own country, living in the Midwest, living out in the Chicago suburbs. So culture, it doesn't just necessarily mean the country you come from. It really can be very specific to somebody's micro ecosystem that they live in and work in. It's made up of what their spiritual beliefs might be. It's made up of what their family might believe, and sometimes it can be something that they create individually by taking learnings or taking aspects of different other religions, maybe other people they know, maybe other microcultures in the US or in other countries, and they integrate them into their own lives. So they create a very individual culture for themselves. Environment, very similar. How we participate with the holidays in America, the types of things we in America usually visualize as being part of the holidays, right? Snowy scenes, frozen lakes and ice skating, snowflakes, a lot of that wintry type of scenery that we in America sometimes tie with the holiday season at this type of year looks very different to people who celebrate those holidays, but they're celebrating those holidays in a different part of the world. Australia, Africa, South America countries, because they're in a different time of year. They're having their summertime. And so the type of things that they associate with the holidays doesn't look the same for us. So environment is a big part of communication. When I talk about a wintry wonderland joy of the holidays, and I'm trying to communicate to somebody who's only experienced the Christmas holidays in Cape May, Africa, or Cape Town, Africa, excuse me, that is, that might not translate very well if they've never heard of our American traditions for the holidays. Experiences, obviously, talked a little bit about that with the last two examples. Personality styles. We're not going to get into personality styles too much For this webinar, I will say this, it is a topic that Courtney and I have discussed bringing to officials in the future, because it is a big part of communication. Knowing your personality style is probably one of the strongest bits of understanding and knowledge that an individual can have in learning to communicate effectively with others. First, we understand ourselves, and then we can understand the best ways to adapt so that we can relate to other people. The mode of communication, we will definitely talk about that here in just a couple minutes. There are three main types of communication modes: nonverbal, verbal, and written. Finally, your general preferences for communication. We'll mention introversion and extroversion a little bit later. I also like to use the example of people who might identify as being on the autism spectrum and not really wanting to, for whatever reason, maybe they physically get sensory overload, so they don't want hugs, they don't want physical contact. But somebody, and I'll speak for myself, somebody who grew up with family and friends and in a culture where you hug a lot, and that was a very normal way to introduce yourself, to say hi to somebody when you're meeting them, to say goodbye to somebody. That is a form of communication, but somebody else might not like that, and to be a recipient of a hug might actually communicate something very different than what the person giving the hug is intending. So let's talk about communication delivery. Body language, tone, and words. I like to call them the three ingredients of communication. Body language, tone, and words very often come up when talking about how we communicate with people. But it wasn't until about, I would say, a little over 10 years ago, that someone really came out with what is currently the commonly accepted model for percentages of how much communication is actually given in these three ingredients. There was a time when words and tone was considered a very important part of communication. And before I started to study this, I actually didn't realize how large the body language ingredient plays in communication. So as you can see here on this chart, 55%, if not more, of our communication is body language. And when you're not using words and all you're doing is interacting with somebody visually, all you have is body language. If you've ever seen somebody do sign language, have you ever noticed their facial expressions? I studied sign language myself in order to better understand this aspect of communication. I studied it for a semester in college. And one of the very first things they taught us was the importance of our facial expressions. And we spent a majority of the first part of that semester discussing facial expressions and how we stood and our body language before we even really got into the actual hand symbols. It is such a major part of their communication that when you're doing sign language, if you don't have any of those, it's the non-hearing person's equivalent of somebody who only speaks in a monotone. It's very hard for me to speak into it as in a monotone as an example. So I'm not going to try to do that. But if you have ever heard someone who you would classify as speaking in a monotone, you know how hard that is to follow. And you know how hard it is to really understand what their meaning and intention is behind the words that they might be speaking. Emails and text is another good example. When you don't have that body language and tone of voice, just the words themselves, intention and meaning can get lost very quickly. So body language is extremely important, as is tone. which I just mentioned. The tone of voice, how you say your words is an extremely important part of communication. You can say to someone, hey, have a nice day. It was great seeing you. Or you can say to somebody, hey, have a nice day. It was great seeing you. Same words, very different intentions can be communicated through that. So between body language and tone, what we say, what we communicate is those are more important than the actual words we say. And I just saw Courtney pop up. Courtney, did we have a question or comment come in?
No, I didn't have a question, but I did want to just kind of elaborate a little bit more on what Rebecca was saying about tone, because I think that's especially important when it comes to communicating with coaches and players on court in a match. Because you can be telling them completely, you're 100% correct in what you have to say, but the way that you choose to approach it and the way that you choose to say it could completely turn them off from what the words that are actually coming out of your mouth. And body language also plays a part in that as well. But that's just something that I think all officials really need to keep in mind when communicating with coaches and players, is the importance of how am I being perceived by the person that I am trying to give a ruling to or have a conversation with? Am I coming across, kind of like a jerk, or am I coming across too soft? Or you got to find that right balance in your tone so that you can make sure that you are communicating with them as effectively as possible. So that's definitely something that needs to be on everybody's radar for sure.
Courtney, that is a really good point, and thank you for stepping in here. I have a question for you, actually, if you don't mind. Sure. As an official, when you are discussing rules, regulations, or maybe a call that is being challenged by a player, do you feel that you yourself as an individual, or maybe other officials you've mentored, find that they might talk to players of different ages in a different way in similar situations?
Definitely. And that's one of the things about USTA officiating in particular, is that you could be working with somebody who's 10, or you could be working with somebody who's in their 80s, depending on the level of the event. And obviously you're going to communicate much differently with a 10-year-old or a teenager than you are with an adult. Especially the younger age groups, they're still learning the sport, learning the game, learning the rules. So there's a lot more of an educational component, I feel like, in your communication, to making sure not only that the right rule is applied or the right decision is made, but also that they're learning the why behind it. I find that to be a very important part of, officiating juniors. But that being said, you also, in the collegiate world, you also tend to communicate differently with coaches and players. You're going to have a slightly different approach depending on whether you're talking to one of the coaches of the team or if you're talking to the player, just because they're going to be approaching you differently. So I feel like it's really important to remember who you are addressing in those circumstances, and apply the proper communication appropriately, depending on whether it's a student athlete or a coach in that instance.
And what about in communicating, again, similar situation, but the person you're communicating with is a parent versus the player's coach? Do you feel that there's a propensity possibly for officials to maybe interact differently with those two people in similar situations?
Absolutely. And it is a little bit different in the college spectrum as opposed to the USTA spectrum, because at USTA events, youth especially are going to have parents there. We don't always run into that in college tennis, and their parents are not supposed to be as involved. Obviously, there are certain circumstances where a coach might actually have a child of theirs on the team or something of that, nature, but that's not necessarily common. It happens, but it's not necessarily a common occurrence. And so by default in college tennis, we have far fewer parents that we are involved with in a typical match. However, in a tournament, obviously minors are usually traveling with a coach, or more often than not, a parent, and those parents are going to get involved. And again, there is going to be, in my opinion, not, there's always going to be a certain educational component and aspect, but I think the bigger, maybe not the bigger, but one of the things that is also different too is how I'm approached, and how the person is talking to me is immediately going to impact how I choose to communicate back with them. If somebody is approaching me in a calm manner, and they're, not yelling, and they're not confrontational, but they are addressing an issue that they feel is important, but they're doing it in a respectful manner, I'm far more inclined to immediately go into that respectful communication realm right back. And it's a little harder to stay in that lane of being respectful and staying calm when you have an irate person, whether it's a parent, a coach, a player, whichever, yelling at you and screaming at you about something that's happened. And it's really important to try to stay centered and not get as elevated as they are in behavior, because that's not part of what we want officials to be doing when they are communicating. We need to pretend that everybody is addressing us as calm and level-headed people, because that's how we need to address everybody else. Even when the person opposite us might not be calm and level-headed, we really need to stay calm and level-headed ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have a tennis background. I've never been a player in a match, and obviously I'm not a tennis official, but I certainly do understand from a personal experience in previous roles, that feeling of being approached by somebody in a confrontational state, and needing to very quickly determine, how am I going to communicate with my body language the intention that I need to have for this moment. So if you've got somebody who's coming up and is being, being argumentative, or is coming from a place of defensiveness, or upset or anger, that can be, that can be kind of nerve-wracking. And to your point, it can certainly knock you off your center. But what we do with our nonverbal communication in those split seconds can sometimes have so much of an impact that whatever we say next, is only going to take it further. Whatever we communicate with our body language, the words we say afterwards are only going to perpetuate that. So if we respond with body language that is also defensive or angry, because they have come to us as defensive and angry, then our words are going to more than likely continue that spiral and that exchange of defensiveness and anger. And it's a skill we'll talk about it in a little while, but communication is a skill that over time you can learn and you can adapt. Nonverbal communication, we were just talking, removing defensiveness and de-escalating situations can be extremely impactful. I am learning for officials out there on the court, but also in other relationships that you have. So maybe it's not on the court, maybe it's on your job, maybe it's in a personal relationship. If a situation goes to more of a conflicting, angry space, you can, with your body language, start to communicate the intention that you want to change that. A really good technique that was discussed at a recent workshop was actually walking with the person, if possible. I know a lot of times in officials, maybe in a rover position, if you're talking to a player or you're trying to see multiple courts, you might not be able to do this. But some officials, some people at tournaments or events might be in the position to be able to walk with somebody, walk them away from, the immediate surroundings. Not only does the movement of walking help generate the body to produce the chemicals in your brain that help calm you down, but it also communicates to the other person, okay, you know what, let's walk together side by side, and by facing the same direction, as the person, you are communicating with your body, I want to work with you and move in the same direction as you. If they're really defensive and want to argue with you and you stay face to face, that's a defensive posture that a lot of people will take as a cue to continue the argument. But if you just turn your body and you just start walking with somebody and you're facing the same way, even before you start talking about the situation, you're already communicating to that person, I want to work with you. I want us to move together in the same direction. It's subtle. It's a technique that I have found very effective in multiple situations. And when you can use it, sometimes even just walking 5 or 10 steps is enough to change the tone of the interaction and to help the other person calm down. Other things that nonverbal communication does is it helps to reduce misunderstandings. If you are wanting to communicate to somebody information and you put your body in a more relaxed state, that reinforces to the person, I'm simply communicating information to you. I'm not looking to fight. I'm not looking to have an argument. This isn't something personal. I am communicating information to you. That can be a really effective tool. Conversely, it can also be ineffective if you're wanting to impart emotion as well as information. So you might have to play with that, but we do have lots of examples, I think, in our society of characters in TV shows and movies that really want to impart information, and they keep such a relaxed posture, and they keep such a low tone of voice because they're just relaying information, and you don't get any emotion from them. One of my favorite characters that I feel shows this is, if you've ever watched The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon Cooper. That character from The Big Bang Theory in the beginning seasons, I think, does a really good job of showing someone who tries to communicate information constantly and is not able to recognize in a moment when emotion is needed. And by not communicating emotion, it actually causes conflict. So that is a technique that in personal and family situations, you might not want to use excessively, but I am learning officials many times, you want to simply communicate to somebody a rule or a regulation or the reason for a specific call. And so you might want to be sure that your body language matches what you're wanting to say. All right, so now we're going to shift real quick into electronic communication. We're going to talk about this briefly. I do not want to get into too many details as far as electronic communication, because I want us to maintain momentum and to have more time for your questions. So the electronic communications for an official has a lot of benefits. I understand not every official uses electronic communication, but you also communicate electronically outside of your tennis officiating career. So this is good things to understand. Something you can take beyond being an official. And I do apologize. I'm recognizing I keep looking to my left because that's where the screen that I am sharing is with you guys, and my camera is in front of me. So I do apologize. I'll try to stop doing that. The benefits for electronic communication is that it's written. So again, imparting knowledge, being very clear with a message that you want to give out, very specific details or information. Electronic communication is great for that. I personally am a fan of bullets. I love my bullet points, and I love my electronic communication to be very succinct and to the point. Even though I can get a little wordy, and I love words and reading and writing, I do like to try to keep things bulleted. It can be fast, and it can be easy to reach a lot of people at one time. Challenges are sometimes particularly in my case, I do like to wordsmith. And so I sometimes get really wordy. Fortunately, I have people on my team that help me with that. You don't have any body language or tone. We mentioned that a moment ago. You can accidentally have a reply all situation. Again, if we were in the room, I do a quick show of hands and asked if anybody was on group texts, and we might have a little discussion about group texting. That is another form of communication that you can reach a lot of people at one time, but then it can very quickly de-escalate into multiple mini conversations, and all of a sudden you've got people talking about something or talking one-on-one between themselves to a whole group of people. And so, not only is an individual person's text chain overloaded, but now they're getting pings and dings on their phone, for items of communication that they might not be interested in or might not need to know. And then there's sometimes the issue where people don't open emails, and I know I've done that with my personal email box more than once. So here's some ways that you can win at electronic communication. Be clear and concise and thorough. Make sure you tailor your communication to your audience. Stay on topic. Share essential information only. Stick to the facts and avoid emotion. And always include a way for people to follow up if you need to. These win suggestions are really great for electronic communication. If you're a referee, tournament director, or working in an event where you might have to communicate with the public or players, parents, coaches, those specific audience groups, I would say to expand this so that it is applicable also to your personal life. Sometimes it is hard to avoid emotion during written communication, particularly in the text. My suggestion, though, is when you yourself are feeling highly emotional in any kind of written communication exchange, whether by email or texting, put it down. Close the laptop, put the phone down, and walk away. When you yourself are feeling a lot of emotions, sometimes it's actually harder to write them down concisely into a couple sentences that actually communicate what you're wanting the other person to know, including if you're wanting them to know that you're feeling bad. It is okay to tell somebody, I think, in our day and age over text, hey, I'm a little upset about something that happened. Can we talk later? I think that's okay. But sometimes you need to put the device down and walk away in order to center yourself and be able to come back and communicate concisely in the written electronic form. Courtney, hi.
Hi, we actually had a good question come in. How would you recommend people address the issue of tone in written communication when, the way you're intending something to be, said, the intent behind those words might be very different than how they are perceived by the recipient. Mm-hmm. So since there is no ability to read body language or hear inflection in a voice when you're reading those words, how do you think it would be best to address that when we do so much electronic communication these days, whether it's text, email, whatever? What's the best way to go about addressing that issue?
That is a great question. I always recommend that if at all possible, stop the electronic communication. Not that you have to suddenly ghost them or stop responding, but maybe simply send them a text that says, I don't think I am accurately communicating what I'm feeling, or I'm not sure that I am effectively telling you how I'm feeling or what I'm trying to say. Can we jump on a FaceTime call? Can we set up a Zoom meeting? Or can we go meet for coffee? Or, I'll see you in a couple hours. Maybe it's your spouse or it's somebody else that's in your household, and you're, having a conversation via text or email over the day. And it gets a little emotional. and you feel they're taking it in a way different way than you're intending, you can simply say, can we pick this up when we get home later? I think that is a really great way to sometimes kind of stop all the misunderstandings and the miscommunications that come with electronic communication, is to try to, as fast as possible, get to some kind of in-person, face-to-face contact.
And if face-to-face wouldn't be an option, then perhaps something along the lines of, hey, can we just jump on the phone so that you can hear that tone, or you can, tell that I'm not trying to confront you about something, but this is something that needs to be worked out, and kind of go from there.
Absolutely.
And then, we get so many emails, we get so much electronic communication. There's so many notifications through social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, emails, work emails, personal emails, text messages. How do you combat the overwhelm to make sure that your message isn't lost in all of that extra noise that comes into us electronically on a daily basis?
Oh, extra noise. That is something that I think has become a new norm for us, particularly through through everything that our culture and our world has overcome the last 2 years, and almost 2 years now, is electronic noise. So it's a great question. If possible, again, put it down. Electronic communication is a beautiful tool for imparting knowledge, for sharing insights, for especially sharing good works. I know before this meeting, we were talking about social media, good news, type of channels, where you can go online and on social media to see the good stuff. And I think electronic communication is really helping raise that up and give us the ability to know all the good stuff that's going out there. But it does come with also an increase in being able to see, a lot of the not so great stuff that might be happening and all the noise. So I would say take control back of your Facebook feed, your Twitter feed, your social media. Remove the notifications. You can go into your phone and you can tell your phone, what, don't notify me. If I get a tweet, or if I get a message on Facebook, or, don't even notify me if I get a text. You can really use your phone and your electronic devices and turn off that kind of noise as well. I know it can be difficult in our society. It has become kind of a norm that, you're standing in line in the grocery store and you pull out your phone and you open your Facebook and you're scrolling through, or maybe you're on Instagram. And there's a great time and place for it, but I think it's also an important skill for each of us to have, as to build back up of how to turn it off, and how to step away from it and putting focus back on relating to people non-electronically.
Yeah, I did that on my phone, and it was, I took off all the notification bubbles so that I couldn't see how many messages on us had come in on a certain platform, and I don't get a ding every time it goes off. And that definitely helped. But, I know that there's just so many emails that are sent. That's the ITA's primary mode of communication. I know the USTA does a lot of communicating with officials that way, assigners, all of that stuff. And so is there a key to your message lines or anything like that for professional communication that are flags like, hey, this isn't just another piece of junk mail, when maybe a new assigner is trying to reach out to a new official to get them to work? It's very easy to overlook that. So how do you think it would be best to proceed in those circumstances?
I just want to make sure I understand the question. That is, when I'm sending myself as an official or somebody at a tennis event, I'm sending an electronic communication. How do I ensure that the subject line communicates to the recipient, hey, this is important information you need to pay attention to?
Just so that it's not perceived as like, another piece of spam email. Yeah. It's from, when it's coming from an address that is not one that you recognize.
Yeah, a really great question. I know, again, I'm learning and I continue to learn more about our USTA and ITA communities out there, but particularly the USTA sections and districts. I know that out there we have some very tight-knit communities where the officials watch the players grow from little itty bitties up until, you know, high school, and they're off in college. And I think that that's wonderful. So you know, a lot of times in those tight-knit communities, you might not need to worry so much about that, but in the larger communities, the more active communities where you've got lots of new people coming in and out, be really specific in your subject line. You know, I include myself in this, sometimes in subject lines, we like to get creative. We want to be, you know, witty. We want to be eye-catching. We want to be, you know, kind of dazzling, and we want there to be a pop. And sometimes you write those subject lines thinking about the person who is a regular attendee at the tournament, who is already, you know, in the tennis community, or knows your email address, or has already had electronic communication with your event in the past. But to Courtney's point, those really witty and dazzling subject matter lines can look like spam. So I would be really specific in your subject matter lines, even as simple as saying information about this weekend's ABC tennis tournament. Sometimes I like to put action required, registration for this weekend's tournament, response needed, you know, RSVP for this weekend's party. Sometimes, and even putting in dates, you know, action needed, RSVP for party on December 12th. That way people see it, and it correlates more directly to something that they know they have going on in their life. And for new people just receiving communication from your event or your community for the first time, they might need that, especially if it goes into their spam folder and they're trying to look in their spam folder for something specific about the event. Having a subject line that's that specific, they can go, oh, there it is, and they can look at it quickly. Courtney, was there anything else?
Nope, that was all
Okay.
for right now.
Perfect. We're going to move on. We wanted to relay this information because there is changes for safe play coming out. If you have not heard, there are some new regulations taking effect on January 1st, and communication to junior players is a big part of making sure that we maintain the integrity and the safe space of the tennis world for our junior players. So here's just some quick notes on how to win at communicating, particularly electronically, with junior players. You know, and I would definitely say make sure that if you haven't looked at your safe play for a while, you know, I know this past year for the USTA, it was what's known as a vision form. So we were all doing vision forms this past year, but you might want to just make sure that you understand and are up to speed with your safe play regulations in regards to communication and interacting with our junior players. All right, we're going to include a handout. It's called Active Listening. Gives you some best practices for active listening. This is a really great tool that has been communicated a lot through various realms. I'm sure everyone on this call has heard about it, you know, in some way, shape, or form. In essence, active listening is intentional listening to another person with the specific objective of responding directly back to what they have said. Believe it or not, studies have shown that most of the time when we communicate to people, we are actually thinking about how we're going to respond. We are not necessarily directly listening to the other person. There is a lot more details and a lot more information with active listening. There are different takes to active listening, but that, for the purposes of our webinar and for the experience we wanted to create for you tonight, we did just want to give you this little handout about active listening. Again, it's a topic that Courtney and I have discussed, possibly bringing into more depth in future learning series experiences or other ways we might be able to provide it to our officials, both in the ITA and USTA. And now we've come to the end of our communication topic. Courtney, do we have any really impactful questions? We've got about 10 minutes left, so I want to be sure we answer some of our high priority questions.
Yeah, we've gotten several questions about how to communicate with international players who speak a different language. How can we be more clear in what we have to say? And also, how do we make sure that they're understanding what we say in those circumstances where you, like you mentioned before, if you don't speak the same language, you're not going to communicate effectively. But if there's a little bit, how do you close that gap when you're in that situation?
Really great question. So it's a situation that I myself have only been in once or twice in my career. But when you find yourself caught in a moment where the other person you're communicating with doesn't speak your language and you don't speak theirs, and you need them to understand or to get direction. I can think of specifically, it's happened for me in an event when I was trying to do crowd control, and I was needing people to move to a different area. There was it wasn't high safety concerns, but it was a concern that we needed people to move out of the way because I think we had trucks coming that were going to come through, and somebody just didn't understand what I was trying to say. Body language, using very emotionally neutral types of gestures whenever possible is helpful, and making sure that if you note, especially on their end, that they are starting to get frustrated, stay calm and certainly try to get somebody else involved who understands the language as quickly as possible. I don't know, I can't give an example about an officiating situation where this has happened. Courtney, do you have anything from your history where you've had this situation?
Well, from a collegiate perspective, there have been times where a player's English was not very strong. And so I would get the coach involved in that instance. Yeah. To make sure that you have somebody there who is speaking the language of both players, and able to, or both yourself and the player, and just have that communication line open and available. It is a little bit different when you're dealing, maybe at a international junior tournament where you've got kids from all over the world, and you don't necessarily have that luxury because you don't have another person that you can get involved. When you're making an on-court ruling, you can always ask for the referee or the supervisor, and, they might be able to find a translator of some kind. But by and large, you just have to do the best you can when you're in those situations where you might not have, a firm grasp. Neither one of you will have a firm grasp on the language in which you're trying to communicate.
Yeah. And I would, I would add to that, Courtney, that quite possible what would be beneficial is for officials to possibly have that discussion before the event with the person hiring, the referee or the tournament director who might be having that initial communication to hire them. Might be, if it's an unknown area, hey, is there a possibility that there's going to be families in attendance if it's a junior event where they're not going to be speaking they might not speak English. And if there's a situation or a problem, what should I do?
Yeah. And sometimes it's, it's hard to know that information in advance for sure. But just doing the best you can. And, it's a tough spot to be in when you can't communicate effectively because of a language barrier for sure.
Absolutely. Any other questions?
I don't know if you feel like we have enough time to go into this, but constructive criticism is a big part of communication, and we tend to give a lot of feedback to our officials. So how would you say, what is the most effective way to communicate constructive criticism to an official who might need, could use some pointers, could use some improvement, and what are some big not to do items on that list as well?
Yes, feedback is so important as a tennis official, and in all areas of life. I like to help people stay focused on providing positive feedback. And we title it criticism, feedback, whatever you want to term it. You are giving someone information that is completely a reflection on their behavior. And that can be hard for some people. Some people are very open to it. Some people who are usually open to it could be having a bad day. And then when you want to talk to them, they don't take it as well as you thought they would. So it is something that can be learned. It's a skill that can be developed. The first step I always ask somebody to do when they're learning to provide feedback or constructive criticism is to always briefly recap the situation. You want to make sure that, first of all, you communicate to the person, here's my understanding of the situation, because you don't want to give them feedback if they don't feel you understand the situation. If you actually observed, let's say it's a referee, and the referee actually observed a roving official have an interaction with a player, and that observation that the referee had lasted 3 minutes, you want to be sure that the official that you are communicating with recognizes that you saw the entire 3-minute interaction. If you just walk up and immediately start talking about one particular pinpoint that they did that you're wanting to give feedback to, they might not be, they might be more prone to get defensive and might not want to take the conversation further. Rather, they're going to want to explain the whole situation to you. So I think it's important that you do a very brief recap. Plus, that also helps minimize misunderstandings, because if you saw the 3-minute of interaction, but the interaction was actually 5 minutes long, maybe there's other information that you can use in informing your feedback that could actually change possibly the criticism or the feedback and the recommendations that you give to that official. Praise something they did well. Find something. Make sure that they hear you tell them something that you genuinely appreciate about how they handled the situation. If at the very least you can always appreciate maybe how the referee moved the conversation, moved past the conversation and got back to play. Or you can recognize possibly just the fact that they stood there and they, if it was a really upset person, that they didn't, get more upset or defensive. But whatever you praise, do make sure that it's genuine praise, and that it's something that you actually feel appreciation about. Find at least one thing that you can say, I think you did really well here. Then let them know, here's what I think you could do better, but then give them something to do. Give them a way to get better. Even if it is, hey, here's what I think you can get better for the rest of today. Why don't you try explaining, maybe it was the way they explained a rule. Why don't you try explaining the rule this way? and then you and I can talk after the event or later tonight. We can talk more about it. Or we'll sit down and we'll, open up the friend at court and we'll go over that together. If it's a personal situation, similar kind of response, give them that feedback and then, let them know what they might do. Perhaps, of a YouTube video or a channel on the internet, or a website that they can do, or a book, something that they can take action on, so that they feel like it's not just, okay, I'm taking a criticism and now I got to walk away and kind of, deal with it. But it's like, oh, I actually have an opportunity to grow here, and this person is going to help me with my growth.
And one of the things that I think is really important about everything that you just said, while I statements tend to go a lot further than the you statements when you're communicating, and it's maybe a touchy subject, or maybe it is, kind of something along the lines of constructive criticism. And you definitely implied that in your, in your suggestions for how to approach those. But I definitely wanted to point that out. People are far less likely to be as defensive with a statement, I noticed that this was happening, as opposed to you did this. They tend to feel less attacked when it's coming from a place of an I statement, whether it's in your personal life or your professional. And I've noticed that it will go a lot further when you start with the I statements, as opposed to pointing the finger at them and using the you statements more frequently and leading with those statements.
Absolutely. So if he hasn't done it already, because I'm not watching the chat log, I will ask Matt to post the handout into the chat log. Attendees, you can download it to your computer from the chat log. We are also going to have it available in the Learning Resource Center. We are at the top of the hour, right at 5 o'clock Eastern. So I do truly appreciate everybody for being here. I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar briefly that we were going to talk about emotional intelligence, and this topic, we've had such a robust conversation with it that we've run out of time. So I do apologize for not getting to the emotional intelligence topic, but I assure you we will make sure that that we will have a future event and we will delve into emotional intelligence. It will be a topic that we will share with you and bring to you into the new year. So Courtney and Podkin, I really appreciate you being here. If you have questions, feel free to email either of us directly. This was actually a fun photo we took at our strategy session. Courtney and I met in person to strategize our joint education ventures for 2022 so that we could be prepared to bring you guys even more great experiences. And she and I ended up arriving the first day looking dressed very similar. So
even though we had never actually met in person, all of our communication had been electronic, whether it was email or Zoom or, go to meeting or anything like that. So yes, I found it particularly funny.
Yes. So just wanted to let you guys know we are finding this creating these experiences for you fun. We're enjoying our work. We hope that you are enjoying them, and we hope that you are getting some takeaways to use in your officiating career and maybe help you out in other areas of life. We look forward to seeing you at the next learning event, and let us know again, emailing directly if you have any questions, and you can find this recording and the handout in the LRC within 2 weeks. We will send an email. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time today, everybody. Have a good evening.